Hi, thanks for watching. My name's Amber Calm. I'm an astrologer, and today I wanted to talk to you about Britney Spears, sort of some of the karma and themes that I see in her natal chart, as well as looking ahead what I think is what's in store for her next, basically. So one of the things that I want to share with you first is going to be her natal chart, and that's this here on the left-hand side. So a couple of things really stood out to me about her natal chart, and I could honestly talk about this for hours, but I'll try to keep it as short as I can for now. One of the biggest jump outs to me was the Mars in the 12th house here. So Mars in the 12th house can be a difficult placement to have because it brings about unconscious fears and anxieties that can be held in the body and cause nightmares. It can cause breakdowns. And it can also cause you to have basically enemies in your life, hidden enemies, or people you didn't expect, or people that hurt you in secretive and hidden ways. Now, this is really interesting, obviously, when we think about Britney Spears, everything that she's been through. But one of the other things that is interesting to think about with her is that the 12th house is also associated with our past lives. There are several indicators in a chart that you can look at for past lives, and the 12th house is one of them. So most of the times that I've seen somebody with Mars in the 12th house, it's because they died violently in a past life. And that is part of the fears that are coming up that are hard to place or diagnose. They can seem kind of out of nowhere. And in part, they are there because of this past life karma of experiencing such enemies. However, that karma can also develop in the early part of this life for you to face again and deal with. Because what we're here to do, at least according to astrology and probably many other things, I'm sure, is to overcome the karma from our past life. That is indicated in our charts by our North and South node. North and South node is the most important part in your natal chart. Now, in her case, she has North node in the 10th house, and she has her South node in the 4th house. So that's very interesting because the 10th house is represented by, well, it starts with this midheaven point, which is the highest point of the chart. This is when the sun is the highest in the sky, right at, I guess it would be noon or right afternoon, right? That point represents being seen in the world. It represents our reputation. It represents our career, but not in like a sort of everyday job sense, more in a ultimate achievement sense, what we are really known for. So it's about being seen and being recognized. And her South node being in the 4th house is a strong indicator that last lifetime she was denied being able to do that. She was held, it could be against her will or not, considered based on this South node. I get the sense that it is somewhat against her will because of this Mars placement, but regardless, we can see that she was restricted in her past life. You can see that Venus is close to that South node as well, so she was likely restricted by a relationship. Could be a marriage, most likely. Could be other types of relationships, but I'm going to guess marriage. So I would say, based upon what I see in her chart, it seems to me like in a past life, she was maybe in some type of arranged marriage or married off to somebody. Regardless, whoever it was that she married was very strict, held her within the household, was very abusive, and may have been the cause of her death. And so to overcome that karma in this lifetime, don't think of karma as something that you owe or that you did wrong. It's more like to balance the scales, you sort of need to do some of the opposite things in this life to help make it more fair and neutralize it. So in this life, she obviously is a very famous person, so she's definitely on the right track with this North node. To combat last lifetime, she needs to be recognized. She needs to be out there. She needs to be seen. And she needs to be her own person. She needs to be free and not held back. And that can actually be difficult for somebody that has this sort of nodal placement because whether or not it was against their will in the last lifetime and or early life, regardless, their soul is used to being restricted and not being seen. And so being put out there can be kind of uncomfortable for these people. So it's probably not always, it's probably not always been easy for her to have been out there as much as she has been, being that she's so famous. You can also see that by other points in her chart, like Saturn in the first house, restricted sense of self, squares Venus, she's really hard on herself. Mars in Virgo tells you that too. I could go on and on, but regardless, we can see that that is a big thing that plays in her lifetime. Another quick thing I want to point out is that one thing that can release her and help her on this path is going to be her children, most likely, because if we look at the North Node, the 10th house gives us a general theme. It's in Cancer, so let's look at the rulership of that, which is the moon. It's here in the house of children, and it's very well aspected. So having moon in the 5th house can mean that you are a really good entertainer. Not that you necessarily enjoy being in the limelight. You might be okay with that, but regardless, what it really means is that you get a lot of joy, genuine happiness from creative pursuits that are associated with the stage, like theater, music, and all sorts of different creative pursuits, really. So I do believe that her enjoyment of that is genuine. I think she does really enjoy that part of her life. That being said, this house is also associated with children. So that is interesting to me, because that is an example of how you can use your past life karma, because your past life karma, where your South Node is what you've already mastered, how she can use that to her advantage to move forward and propel herself into the 10th house. Because the thing that held her back last time was relationships. So she feels very strongly about her relationships, especially her home family relationships. This is associated with family. So children are a really big part of that, obviously. However, her relationship to her children also can help her be more strong within herself, be more connected to what gives her joy, and be more comfortable with putting herself out there in response to that. So that's just something I thought I would point out, because I've often heard that people have tried to limit her time with her children, and that is particularly evil because of how important that really is to her. So let's look ahead. I don't want to make this video too long, and I wanted to touch on some of the things that I saw looking ahead for her. So before I look ahead, let's talk real quick about looking back. So back in 2008, when she first got into this situation, Saturn entered her 12th house for the first time, and Uranus got very close to the 7th and ended up entering the 7th shortly thereafter. This is very significant because Saturn through the 12th house indicates that you want to spend a lot of time alone. It adds extra restriction and isolation to your life, and it can restrict spiritual connection and a sense of hope and things like that. It's particularly significant for her because of this Mars placement that I talked about earlier. So it really probably agitated a lot of this karmic stuff that she has going on there, and brought forth some real restriction and enemies that she's dealing with to this day. Around early 2018, it continues to progress. Saturn moves forward, finally gets into the 4th house. Uranus finally leaves the 7th house. With Uranus being in the 7th house through that time, that indicates, because that's a period of about 10 years, that indicates really abrupt and sudden changes in her relationships. Those abrupt changes could have been part of the issues that she was dealing with on sort of a mental level with Saturn going into the 12th house. That's would be my assumption. That being said, as it moves forward out of there into the 8th house, that's when there starts to be a lot more open argument about who is owed what, who is in charge. And it sounds like, I don't completely follow all of her stories. I'm sure some of you do more than I have, but sounds like I've heard that there's been a lot of argument and back and forth about that in recent years. Sounds like this year in particular has been when the arguments really ramped up. And this is something that I think could be really positive for her, which is that around July, she had what's called a progressed full moon. I miswrote that. A progressed full moon, which indicates that indicates a culmination of a very important factor in her life. Now, you won't see those changes take form immediately, but they will start to take form starting at that point and will be recognized fully within that year. In July, I believe, is when her family started to become a lot more vocal about arguing about her current situation and legal situation. At that same time, Mars started its entrance into Aries, and I made a lot of videos about that. You may have heard about that if you follow astrology. It's a very significant event that has been happening. It's going to stay in Aries for a lot longer than usual because of a retrograde. Now, this affects a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and frankly, some people in some very negative ways. But I think in her case, it could be quite helpful because that puts Mars in her 7th house. It's going to keep Mars in her 7th house, and then it's going to retrograde, and it's going to stay in that 7th house pretty much the entire retrograde. So from then when it entered in July until the end of the year. And it just went retrograde earlier last week on the 9th. So it being in retrograde and it being in the 7th house at all really tells us that people are willing to go to bat for her. People are willing to fight for her. People will also fight with her. So there's going to be a lot of legal battles and back and forth. It's not going to be an easy breakaway for sure. It indicates a lot of frustration and anger really boiling to the surface. And that can, like I said earlier, that can be really bad for a lot of people, but in her case, that might be the push that she really needs, because what she ultimately needs is people that are willing to push forward and fight for her. And this Aries energy can do that for her, can really push people to do that. And so because of those two factors that just happened in July, I do think that she is going to find some sort of success in this pursuit. I don't think it's going to be an easy cut and dry success by any means, and let's get into why, but I do think that what's starting now and has started over the past couple of months for her is ultimately going to get her closer to where she wants to be. So that whole retrograde situation is going to continue through the end of the year. So I don't think you're going to see a lot clear up for her until next year. There'll be a lot of fighting going on for her. I don't know how much of it is open or not, but I'm sure a lot of it's behind closed doors, and it looks like it's pretty intense to me. But early next year, Mars will finally leave her 7th house, and Jupiter will enter her 5th house, and Saturn will be about to leave this 4th house as well. So what that tells us is that that relieves some of the pressure that she is feeling as far as fighting with people and having issues with her family. With Saturn being in her 4th house, which it has been for a couple of years, she's been facing a lot of limitations in her home life, more so than usual, like not being able to see her kids, for example, or something like that. And that can be very difficult and depressing. But as it starts to leave that 4th house, that's going to relieve some of that pressure. Jupiter is going to be getting close to her moon, which means that she's going to be really happy. That's going to bring some really good, happy times, which tells me that she reaches some sort of success that she's really happy about. I don't think it will wrap up right away in January. It seems like there's still some work to be done, but by February and March is when I think that she's going to really start seeing that pressure fully come off, because Mars will finally be out of the 8th house. It'll be in the 9th house, where it's much happier. It's able to move forward. And like I said, Jupiter is going to be there, making her a lot happier, and things like that. That being said, I don't think that will be the end of the game for her. I think there'll still be a lot of difficulties and confusions for her in general, with Saturn being in the 5th house. After this success, I have a feeling that she's really going to not want to perform. Saturn in the 5th house can really limit our sense of creativity and boldness, and really kind of make us less inspired. So, and on top of that, Uranus is still going to be in her 7th house, and it's good, or in her 8th house, sorry, and it's going to be in her 8th house until 2027. So this back and forth about who owes what and arguing about who's in charge of her is still going to go on. So let me just summarize it this way. What I ultimately think is going to happen for her. Ultimately, I think that she's going to continue to have legal battles for the rest of this year for sure. We won't really start to see that clear up for her until early next year. But then she will start to be able to break away. I don't know if she's going to choose the person that she wants to choose to be in charge of her or what have you, and get her father out of the picture or whatever. I think that might be what we see happen at that time, which is going to bring her a lot of happiness. However, it's not going to completely resolve the situation because she's still going to be under somebody's watch. She's still going to have someone that's in charge of her, and I don't see that resolving itself for up to 7 years. So anyway, that's my take on Britney Spears and her chart and what's going to happen next for her. I would like to do some more celebrity charts. If you have a suggestion of somebody else that you'd like me to do, drop that below, and be sure to like and subscribe so that you can see more charts and tips on how to read yours.